Obligatory, no, I'm not back. Today we're going to be talking about the Rootlands, or at least the zone codenamed the Rootlands. This is the area Blizzard has decided to keep hidden, even in beta. And I'm not going to lie, if this area is what I think it is, then I can completely understand why they've decided to keep it hidden until the release of War Within. I guess that's also been your potential spoiler warning. And just to be clear, this is a speculation channel. However, there have been instances in the past where my content has been a bit too on the nose, and so I'm just giving you a warning now. And with that said, let's start from the top. For those that have been around this channel for a while, you know that a theory I've been spouting since the beginning has been the forms of the old gods that we have seen so far are not technically the original forms of the old gods. Instead, they are ecosystems corrupted by the old gods, which just eventually turn into eldritch monstrosities made of flesh. If you want to be even more specific, I've basically been saying the old gods are shadow-corrupted spore mounds, or at least the equivalent of shadow-corrupted spore mounds. And for the uninitiated, spore mounds are basically incredibly dangerous sentient plants. Think everything related to the botany in WoD. Now, to cut a very long story short, I am 50% certain the Rootlands is going to confirm some version of this theory, and in doing so, connect a lot of lore in the process. How is this zone going to do that? Well, in Dragonfight it was revealed the first world tree, the Lunahir, existed. This world tree was A&R Lifebinder's attempt to cleanse Azeroth of the old god's corruption. When it was planted, it was described that the world tree roots spread throughout Azeroth. Then, it's described that Aman'Thul apparently proclaimed the tree was not of order and tore it out of the planet. Now, for those familiar with the lore, Aman'Thul tearing something out of Azeroth should seem very familiar. The reason why is Aman'Thul also tore the old god Y'Shaarj out of Azeroth. His reason in that recollection of history being, and I quote, "It poisoned the minds of the Titanforged, drawing out their fears and darkening their thoughts." If you were to say that sounds like the Emerald Nightmare, I wouldn't blame you, because I completely agree. But I guess to just stop beating around the bush, the destruction of a Lunahir and Y'Shaarj sound identical because they are identical. They are the same event. I am fairly certain Y'Shaarj and Lunahir became the same thing when Y'Shaarj inevitably corrupted the world tree A&R planted. And I will honestly be shocked if the events surrounding Lunahir and Y'Shaarj are not the same events, and funnily enough, it's not entirely because of my ego. No, the reason is because it was well established and has been well established for quite some time now that the Titans did not directly interact with the Black Empire or Azeroth because they knew their power would destroy the planet. And so that is why Aman'Thul interacting with Y'Shaarj was such a shocking event and why it left such a scar on the planet. And so for Aman'Thul to interact with Azeroth twice, pulling out two entities that are fairly similar in what they did, e.g. burrowing themselves thoroughly into the planet, and then in both instances deciding to tear them out of the planet, it just screams, quite frankly, comically evil, as in not even arrogant, just inept. But I guess what I'm saying is, bad guys may be bad, but that doesn't make them stupid. Now, with the context I've just added that Y'Shaarj and Lunahir are the same thing basically, we now have a better idea as to why the Well of Eternity was created. As in, assumedly, A&R planted the tree got corrupted and became incredibly powerful. Aman'Thul then, in a desperate attempt to salvage the Titans' invasion of Azeroth, pulled the tree out of the world, ruptured the world in the process, and then the tears of A&R stabilized the wound, or at least a tear of A&R stabilized the wound. What's also interesting about this is the story of Lunahir also gives great context behind the creation of Un'Goro Crater, Sholazar Basin, and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, as well as the creation of the Wild Gods, as according to the lore surrounding Lunahir, A&R literally told Freya to, and I quote, "Watch over the crater and nurture the life that blossomed there." Un'Goro, Sholazar, and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms are literally described as being the places the energies of the Well of Eternity coalesced. Freya literally created 3 places for life to bloom on Azeroth from the Well of Eternity. And I mean, if you want to be even more pedantic, the story says tiers, not tier, meaning you could infer the 3 basins are the locations Aenar's tears landed and were used as a catalyst to grow life on Azeroth. Now, this is where things get interesting. If what I've just said is true, Aenar knew there was a massive system of old god corrupted tree roots spread throughout Azeroth, and seemingly believed her keeper could cleanse them. And you know what's funny? I think she was right. Unfortunately, what I don't think she expected, or anyone really expected, was Loken and the inevitable fall of the Keepers. Though what's funny about that statement is, there actually kind of was a failsafe for the Keepers falling. That failsafe was the Green Dragons, who I assume were tasked to look after the Dream, and I assume the Harbinger / elves / trolls to look after the physical roots. And before you ask about the potential connection between the trolls, the Harbinger and the elves, to be quite frank, that answer is a whole different topic and requires its own theory. I'm trying to stick to this zone for this theory, but I guess to just give you the TLDR on my end, I am 50-50 on the idea that the Harbinger are either the origin of the trolls, or they are the missing link between the trolls and the elves. Take your pick. I assume the Harbinger animation is going to explain this, or at least hint at it, and if it does, well, that's convenient because I can then just react to it and explain the theory there. If not, well, I guess that's another theory on the back burner. Anyway, despite having these secondary failsafes, we all know what happened to the trolls / elves and the Green Dragons. War of the Ancients. The Sundering. And so after the Sundering, assuming this theory is correct, it seems as if the Harbinger were the only failsafe left to look after the roots. However, it's also reasonable to assume they suffered a great amount of losses during the Sundering as well, meaning at best they're a bunch of untamed, unrestrained World Tree roots that likely have the same disposition as the out-of-control plants of Draenor, now spread over Azeroth even further than they once were, while also being susceptible to old god corruption and at worst are still corrupted by the old gods. And the potential guardians of these roots have been whittled down to a single mortal species who also likely suffered a lot of damage during the Sundering. Now at this point, it may just seem like I'm pointing out the bad circumstances surrounding the Rootlands and the reason why the Rootlands is in the Khazalgar region to begin with. However, I am now going to read from a list, and from that list, I think you're going to realize how bad the situation actually is, and how this is all going to connect together potentially later, either in the War Within, Midnight, or The Last Titan. The Rays of Fen, which at this point is still invading Mulgore and has reached as far as Durotar, and, fun fact, it's been doing that since Cataclysm, the overgrown root system that infested all of Zuldrak, Shaladrasil from Legion, which without question is the most egregious example of how bad things can get, and fun fact, the tree you see from outside of Shaladrasil isn't actually Shaladrasil. The Nightmare roots are making a profane mockery of the dead tree, whose stump we actually fight on during the Xavius fight in Darkheart Thicket. Galtiris, Stormsong Valley. Remember that random quest zone with Quilboar? I've almost certainly missed a few zones on this list, but of the ones mentioned, the absolute kick of context added thanks to the Threads of Destiny animation is as follows. If Xal'atath is gathering Old God blood, then going over that list again, Razor Fen, Seathun, Zuldrak, Yogg-Saron, Stormsong Valley, N'Zoth, and if I'm right about Yasharaj and Aluna here being one and the same, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rift of Oln was the Yasharaj connection. Or, for the more grounded theory, Xal'atath literally told players there was a battle between N'Zoth and Yasharaj on the Broken Isle, a battle which Yasharaj seemingly won. And when you consider the events of the High Mountain Allied Race quest, and the fact the Blood Totem tribe of Tauren were a thing, High Mountain may also be the connection to Yasharaj. I also wonder if that's why Neltharion had his lair on High Mountain, and why it was one of the locations he was attempting to make Elementium at. Oh, and I guess there's another semi-trend to these locations. Razorfen, Zuldruck, and the Broken Isle all have Tauren settlements near them. But anyway, at this point I think my point has been made. Those roots never died, and if what Xavius did to Shaladrisil is any indication as to what they can do when properly utilised, Azeroth has a major problem, especially when you consider there is a high probability most of the roots have probably spread in a similar fashion to the Razorfen, just underground. Oh, and that's not even mentioning the ugly possibility that they've managed to connect to each other after 10,000 years, and or at the very least are primed to be connected to each other thanks to the efforts of a certain wandering Harbinger. Like, I mean, to be honest, if all this is actually happening, then in lore, I feel like it's an actual miracle this entire situation hasn't gone to shit yet. And thinking about it, there are probably only 3 reasons I can think of as to why that hasn't happened yet. The first reason is the old gods and whatever else on Azeroth has discovered the power of these roots, like the Quillbore maybe, have been quietly fighting over these roots for what I can only assume has been at least more than a millennia. The second reason is if something wants to control the whole network, a monumental amount of corrupted power is probably needed. Though if I'm not mistaken, Xal'atath already has, / almost has, that monumental amount of power. As in, if the essence of Galakrond isn't going to do it, I assume gathering old god blood like Saronite, which is well known for being able to store a stupid amount of magic for breaking, will probably do it. The third reason I can think of, and it's a wild reason, is this is what the Sword Striker may have actually done, though to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure if the reason for Sargeras stabbing the world has been explained yet, so if I'm talking shit, please feel free to inform me. Now, what's worse about all of what I've just said is that I've only really touched on the Dream Connection, because here's the thing about those spore mounds I mentioned earlier. When they were at the height of their power, they had something called the Evergrowth, which was basically a hive mind that allowed the spore mounds to act as one organism, despite being spread across the planet. As in, the Evergrowth is the reason why the spore mounds were able to create zone-sized giants. E.g. Tanan Jungle and Zangar Marsh are the remains of 2 spore mound giants, respectively. How all this potentially connects to the dream is pretty simple. Remember N'Zoth's visions of Azeroth and his visions of Ny'alotha? And remember how he needed the Forge of Origination to bring it into reality? Well, picture something similar for Xal'atath, except she won't need the Forge. Why? Remember Val Sharaf from Legion? Remember the Dream Surges from Dragonflight? Remember what Xavius was able to do in Stormrage, with arguably less than a quarter of the resources Xal'atath currently has? A part of the reason why the Dream/Nightmare has always been so dangerous is because as a vector of corruption, it has had the easiest time manifesting on Azeroth. So now you couple that with the knowledge that there is a massive root system strewn throughout Azeroth, potentially primed to be corrupted by the Shadow, and it's not hard to imagine how a certain Harbinger may or may not, at least, be able to create a new world-spanning empire, and at worst, corrupt the world soul of Azeroth entirely. So yeah, that's my educated guess as to what the Rootlands is, and how it may potentially play into the future of World of Warcraft's lore. Have a nice day.